In the endless stretch of the universe where stars are born and die like sparks in a dark ocean, there existed a question that no one could answer. It was not a question about love or life, but about numbers. Numbers so strange and vast that even the oldest minds in the galaxy could not understand them. This question was called the prime continuum. It looked simple, but behind it hid a mystery that reached deep into time and space. For ages, the most intelligent beings of the galaxy had tried to solve it. They used machines that could think faster than lightning, minds that could hold 1,000 thoughts at once, and energy that could reshape entire planets. Yet after thousands of years, they were still no closer to the answer. On the crystal planet of Orion, mathematicians with diamond-shaped brains sat around glowing tables of light. They spoke through flashes of color instead of words. Their calculations filled the skies with patterns that danced like auroras. For centuries, they believed they were close. "We almost have it," their lights would say. But every time they reached for the answer, it slipped away like dust through fingers. Far away on the misty world of Andara 9 lived the neural clouds, living thoughts without bodies. They floated in the air like ribbons of silver, merging and separating in endless waves. They believed they could think better than any creature made of flesh. They turned themselves into a living computer, connecting millions of minds together to solve the prime continuum. They filled entire moons with their equations. But even they failed. The problem laughed at them silently, like a locked door that knew no key could open it. Other races tried too. Creatures made of gas, energy, and light. Some used songs as mathematics, others used geometry built from gravity itself. But the result was always the same: failure. The galaxy had conquered black holes, created machines that lived forever, and built bridges between stars. Yet, one simple mathematical problem stood like a mountain no one could climb. The question had begun long ago, before many stars even existed. It was created by the first civilization, the ones who learned how to travel through space without ships. They discovered that the universe itself had patterns, rhythms like music, and that numbers could describe them. But one rhythm did not fit. That rhythm was the prime continuum. They believed that if it could be solved, all of space-time could be mapped perfectly. Travel would become instant. Energy would be infinite, and perhaps time itself could be understood. When that civilization disappeared, they left behind only fragments of their knowledge, written in languages no one could fully read. Later species translated and retranslated those fragments until the theorem became a legend. Solving it became the highest dream of every great mind. It was said that whoever solved the prime continuum would hear the heartbeat of the universe. But as centuries turned to millennia, hope began to fade. The Galactic Council, a group of the most advanced civilizations, eventually declared it a sacred problem. It was no longer just mathematics. It was philosophy. Some said it was unsolvable because the universe wanted to keep one secret. Others believed that only a being that understood both logic and emotion could ever find the truth. But no such being seemed to exist. Generations passed. Entire star systems rose and fell. Still, the same glowing symbols appeared on research walls everywhere. The endless equation that mocked even the brightest intellects. Scholars grew tired. Students lost faith. The problem became a story told to inspire young minds. Even the wisest can fail. No one truly believed it could ever be solved, but the universe is full of surprises. Somewhere far from the great centers of power, on a small blue world that most of the galaxy didn't even notice, a new kind of mind was quietly learning how to think. This planet was called Earth. Its people were young compared to the stars. They still argued, made mistakes, and built dreams out of chaos. Their machines were slow compared to the galactic standard. Their knowledge was small. Yet they had something rare: imagination. They didn't just follow logic. They followed curiosity. They failed, fell, and tried again. They didn't always think correctly, but sometimes that was their greatest strength. While the galaxy's super-intellects dismissed Earth as a primitive planet, a few curious beings began to watch. They noticed something strange. Humans had a way of solving problems that others had given up on. They could see patterns where none existed. They could jump between logic and emotion like it was one continuous line. Some called it madness. Others called it genius. And sometimes it was both. Still, no one expected humans to care about the prime continuum. The problem had become a legend, something too big for a species that was still learning how to live peacefully. But legends have a way of finding new listeners. A transmission was sent one day, an open call to all minds in the galaxy. The prime continuum remains unsolved. Any civilization wishing to attempt it may apply for inclusion. Billions ignored it. A few laughed. But on Earth, one small research institute received the signal and decided to forward it to their mathematics department. And so, the story began to stir again. In a quiet room on Earth, filled with papers, books, and coffee cups, someone stared at the strange symbols glowing on a holographic screen. She didn't know that she was looking at the same puzzle that had defeated civilizations older than her sun. To her, it was just another problem. Challenging, beautiful, impossible maybe, but not hopeless. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Rao. She was a mathematician, but also a dreamer. She believed that every problem, no matter how complex, had a story hidden inside it. And if you could understand the story, you could find the answer. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, the great mathematicians continued their endless struggle. The crystalline thinkers of Orion built a machine so large it used the light of 3 suns just to power its calculations. The neural clouds on Andara 9 expanded their consciousness into the dark matter fields, searching for answers between atoms. Still, they failed. Some began to whisper that perhaps the problem itself was alive, that it changed every time someone got close to solving it. It had become a test of patience, faith, and humility. And while they argued about philosophy and perfection, Evelyn worked alone. She didn't even know the others were still trying. To her, the problem was not a sacred mystery. It was a challenge, something to play with, to wrestle, to understand with heart as much as with mind. She scribbled notes in the margins, drew strange patterns, and talked to herself as if the equation were listening. The Galactic Archives marked 10,124 failed solutions across history. They predicted it would remain unsolved for another 1,000,000 years. But history often forgets to count the smallest voices, the ones that whisper instead of shout. As the galaxy watched from afar, the legend of the prime continuum continued to glow like a lonely star, waiting. The greatest minds were still at work, their confidence slowly turning into quiet despair. Some believed the answer would come only when the universe was ready to end. Others simply gave up. And yet on a tiny planet spinning around an ordinary sun, a woman with messy hair and too much coffee smiled at the same equation and said softly, "Maybe you're not as complicated as they think." She didn't know it yet, but the galaxy's oldest riddle was about to meet its match, not in a being of infinite logic, but in a human mind that saw beauty in imperfection. For the first time in ages, the equation trembled, not from the pressure of logic but from the warmth of curiosity. And somewhere deep within the cold silence of space, it was as if the universe itself took a quiet breath, waiting to see what would happen next. When the Galactic Council finally decided to open the Prime Continuum challenge to other species, it was not because they had hope left, it was because they had lost it. For thousands of years they had tried and failed. The greatest minds, the strongest machines, the oldest civilizations, all had bowed before that stubborn riddle of the universe. So in a moment of quiet desperation, the Council made a strange announcement. Let all who live under the stars try. The message spread like light across galaxies. From red dwarfs to blue giants, from icy moons to molten worlds, every civilization received it. It was transmitted in 1,000,000 languages through sound, light, emotion, and even dream. Some saw it as a joke, others as an insult. A few saw it as a last chance to prove their greatness. But on most advanced worlds, no one believed any small or young species could ever help. The old races had already decided that only those with perfect logic could solve it, and perfection was something humans had never been known for. Far away, on Earth, the signal arrived almost by accident. The dish that caught it was part of an old observatory in the mountains of Chile. The scientists there were half asleep when the strange transmission appeared on their screens. It wasn't in any known language, but it carried a repeating pattern, like a heartbeat made of numbers. When decoded, it read, "The prime continuum remains unsolved. Participation is open." The scientists laughed at first. Some kind of alien prank? One joked. But curiosity has always been humanity's oldest habit. So they forwarded the message to several universities. Within days, mathematicians all over the world were staring at the same glowing symbols that had defeated civilizations thousands of times older than their own. Some shrugged. Some were amazed. A few, however, felt something different, an itch in the brain, a pull of wonder. Among them was a woman named Dr. Evelyn Rao. Evelyn wasn't famous, at least not outside her field. She taught mathematics at a small university. Her office was always messy, her coffee always cold, and her hair always escaping from its bun. Her students loved her because she made math feel like magic. She believed every equation was a story waiting to be told. When she saw the prime continuum for the first time, she didn't see numbers. She saw patterns dancing like constellations. "What are you?" she whispered, tracing the symbols on her tablet screen. She didn't know that this question had been whispered across galaxies by beings made of light, by clouds of pure thought, by machines older than her planet. Meanwhile, in the vast hall of the Galactic Council, the decision to allow Earth's participation caused a storm of arguments. The council chamber floated above a golden nebula, glowing with the light of newborn stars. Delegates from hundreds of civilizations were present, some shaped like crystals, others like mist, some without any shape at all. The air shimmered with voices, colors, and telepathic waves. "The humans?" One delegate hissed, her body flickering with blue fire.
"They are barely out of their own gravity well."
"Their minds are primitive, their species unstable," a voice made of light answered calmly. "Yet the law is clear. The challenge is open to all." Laughter rippled through the chamber, a mixture of sound and energy. "Do you expect apes to solve what the Andaran clouds could not?" Another voice boomed. But the council was bound by its own rule. Any sentient species could attempt the problem. And so Earth's name was added to the list, somewhere near the bottom, just above a few insect colonies that had recently achieved basic intelligence. Most delegates dismissed it immediately. Some even placed bets on how quickly humans would fail. But curiosity spread even among skeptics. A few alien scholars began studying human mathematics. They were confused by what they found. Humans had invented logic systems that contradicted each other yet still worked. They used imagination as part of proof. They laughed during failure, and often discovered new things by accident. To beings that worshipped perfection, this behavior seemed both ridiculous and fascinating. What kind of species mixes emotion with calculation? One crystalline thinker wondered aloud. "An unstable one," replied another. "Or maybe," said a quiet voice, "a different kind." On Earth, Evelyn's life began to change in ways she could not have imagined. At first, she treated the prime continuum like a side project, something to study between her classes. But soon it started to consume her thoughts. She would wake up in the middle of the night and scribble equations on napkins, walls, even her own hands. Her friends worried, but she only smiled and said, "It's beautiful. You wouldn't understand." News began to spread that a human mathematician had taken an interest in the Galactic Challenge. The information reached the council almost instantly. Some laughed again. "Ah, the human," they said. "The one who still uses paper and pen? How quaint." But others grew curious. They sent observers, small drones shaped like orbs of light, to quietly watch her progress. They hovered unseen in her lab, recording her every movement, analyzing her thought patterns. The results puzzled them. She worked slowly, without assistance from any advanced machine. She erased her mistakes often. She paused to think, sometimes for hours, staring at nothing, and yet her progress was real. The observers reported back, "The human does not compute. She feels." "What does that mean?" the council demanded. "It means," said the observer, "that she doesn't solve equations through logic alone. She listens to them as if they are alive." Meanwhile, Evelyn's university received a message from the Galactic Council. It was brief and formal. The human mathematician Evelyn Rao is invited to present her understanding of the prime continuum at the council hall. The professors were stunned. The government panicked. The media exploded with headlines, "Earth invited to Galactic Assembly." Evelyn tried to stay calm, but her hands trembled as she read the invitation. Within weeks, a small ship arrived in Earth's orbit, a smooth silver vessel sent by the council. It hummed softly like a living thing. When Evelyn stepped inside, she felt gravity fade. A voice, calm and gentle, spoke. "Do not be afraid, Dr. Rao, you are among thinkers now." The journey through space was unlike anything she had imagined. Stars moved like rivers of light. Time stretched and folded, yet she didn't feel it. When the ship emerged near the council's world, she gasped. The planet was enormous, surrounded by rings of floating libraries, each glowing with symbols. Beings of light, energy, and crystal drifted through the sky. It was the center of all knowledge in the galaxy. When she stepped onto the shining floor of the council chamber, silence fell. Thousands of eyes, or what passed for eyes, turned toward her. To them, she looked fragile, small, wrapped in a simple cloth suit. No neural implants, no energy field, just a human. Some whispered telepathically, "She's flesh and water." Others said, "She won't last a minute." But Evelyn didn't hear them. Her heart was pounding too loudly. She stood before a glowing sphere that displayed the prime continuum, the same equation that had haunted her dreams. She didn't bow or speak. She simply walked closer, examining it like a child staring at a puzzle. A voice from the council filled the chamber. "Human, state your method." Evelyn smiled nervously. "I don't have a method," she said. "I just see patterns," the council murmured in confusion. "You claim to solve the greatest theorem in existence with no method?" "I'm not solving it," she replied softly. "I'm understanding it." Her answer left them speechless. Beings who could predict star collisions, who could think in 15 dimensions, could not understand what she meant. But something about her calmness, her honesty, unsettled them. For the first time in ages, the council felt curiosity again, the same feeling they had lost long ago when they began worshipping logic above wonder. Evelyn was given a chamber of light to work in, surrounded by data streams from across the galaxy. Machines capable of infinite computation were at her disposal. But she ignored them. She asked instead for chalk, paper, and silence. The council found this amusing. "Primitive tools for a primitive mind," one said. But they allowed it. As she began her work, the observers watched closely. They expected her to fail within hours. But Evelyn did not rush. She walked slowly around the glowing projection of the equation, humming to herself. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she frowned. She treated the prime continuum not like a monster to be slain, but like a story to be told. Days passed. She ate little, slept rarely, but she was not tired. She was alive with thought. The council members came to watch her daily, some out of curiosity, some out of disbelief. One of them, a creature made of living light, whispered to another, "Maybe that is what we've been missing." "What?" the other asked. "Imperfection." And so, the galaxy waited. While Evelyn worked in her small chamber, thousands of worlds watched. The alien news channels buzzed with curiosity. The human attempts the impossible. Back on Earth, her story filled every screen. Children learned her name. Scientists sent her messages of hope. For the first time in history, humanity was not the watcher. It was being watched. Evelyn didn't think of any of that. She didn't care about fame, history, or pride. She just wanted to understand. The numbers spoke to her like old friends. They whispered of balance, beauty, and hidden order. Somewhere deep down, she felt she was close to something wonderful. Not just a solution, but a truth that connected everything. She didn't know it yet. But in the quiet of that chamber, she was about to change how the entire galaxy thought about intelligence, emotion, and the strange, imperfect magic of being human. Inside the bright chamber of light, Evelyn stood alone. Around her floated walls made of living glass, shifting with streams of symbols and equations that glowed like fireflies. The air itself seemed to hum softly, carrying faint whispers of data flowing through the space. The Galactic Council had given her access to every tool and every piece of knowledge ever recorded in the universe. She could command machines that thought faster than any mind on Earth. She could summon ancient theories written before her planet even existed, yet she used none of it. She stood quietly in front of a single floating screen, holding a piece of chalk in her hand even though there was no chalkboard in sight. The observers watched in silence. Many of them were pure energy beings, invisible except for faint ripples in the air. They didn't understand her methods. They expected her to connect her brain to the galactic network, to let the machines feed her every calculation instantly. But instead, she turned off the holograms and drew a small square on the floor with her chalk. She sat inside it cross-legged and began to think. For hours she did nothing but stare. Her eyes followed invisible patterns, her lips moved silently. To anyone watching, it looked like she was wasting time. But inside her mind, a storm of thoughts spun like galaxies colliding. She remembered every equation she had ever loved, every unsolved question that had once kept her awake at night. She remembered the strange feeling she had when she first saw the prime continuum, that it wasn't just math, but something alive, something that wanted to be understood, not conquered. The prime continuum floated before her again, projected as a glowing curve of light. It was beautiful, infinite and delicate like a spiderweb made of stars. The numbers danced in rhythmic loops, repeating endlessly yet never exactly the same. The more Evelyn looked, the more it felt like it was breathing. She leaned closer, whispering softly, "You're hiding something, aren't you?" A small spherical observer recorded her every word. In the council chamber, the delegates listened with disbelief. "She talks to it?" one asked. "She speaks to the equation as if it is alive," the observer confirmed. "Ridiculous," a crystalline thinker muttered. "Equations do not respond to emotion." But another voice, older and quieter, replied, "Perhaps that's why we never solved it." Evelyn began to work. She filled the air with glowing numbers using her chalk-like stylus, building connections that no machine had ever made before. Her logic was strange. She jumped from one idea to another, skipped steps, circled back, erased half of what she'd written, and started again. The alien observers grew more and more confused. To them, mathematics was perfection. Every step had to follow the one before it with absolute precision. Evelyn, however, seemed to dance with her thoughts. She didn't follow the numbers. She led them. When she grew tired, she would lie back on the floor and stare at the ceiling, whispering ideas to herself. "Maybe it's not linear," she said one day. "Maybe it's circular. No, maybe it's both. A circle pretending to be a line." She laughed softly, the sound echoing in the quiet chamber. The machines around her pulsed brighter, responding to her voice. It was as if the entire room was listening, curious. The council watched through their hollow screens. Some found her methods insulting. "This is chaos," one said. "She ignores every established law of computation." "Yes," another replied slowly. "And yet, the patterns she draws are not random. Look closely." When they zoomed in on her work, they saw that her strange scribbles formed fractal shapes, repeating designs that reflected the very structure of the universe. Even though her steps seemed chaotic, her results had order, beauty, and rhythm. She was following something deeper than calculation, instinct. Evelyn didn't use the giant galactic computer because she didn't trust it. "You think too fast," she told it once. "You skip the parts that matter, the parts where we wonder." The machine's glowing core flickered as if confused. To Evelyn, thinking was not just about finding answers. It was about feeling your way through the dark until something clicked. That small magical moment when everything made sense. Days turned into weeks. Evelyn's room became covered with sheets of glowing notes, symbols floating in midair like snowflakes. She barely slept. When she did, she dreamed of numbers that turned into stars and stars that turned into songs. Every morning she woke up with new ideas. Sometimes they failed completely. Sometimes they brought her closer to something that felt right. A pattern, a connection, a heartbeat hidden beneath the chaos. Outside her chamber, the galaxy watched. News channels across hundreds of systems reported updates every day. The human mathematician continues the impossible task. Some viewers mocked her. Others were strangely inspired. On faraway planets, young alien students began imitating her methods, mixing art and numbers, logic and emotion. They called it human mathematics. Inside the chamber, Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached what she thought was a breakthrough. She had discovered a rhythm, a hidden pulse that ran through the entire equation. It repeated every 7 layers, then reversed itself like the inhale and exhale of a living creature. "You breathe," she whispered. "You're alive in your own way." The room responded. The glowing lines pulsed in sync with her voice. For a moment she felt something strange, a warmth as if the numbers themselves were aware of her presence. It wasn't science anymore. It was connection. The prime continuum wasn't resisting her. It was guiding her. In the council chamber, the alien minds began to argue. "This is impossible," said one. "She cannot be interacting with a mathematical construct." "Maybe she's not," another replied. "Maybe she's interacting with the universe itself. Maybe that's what the equation truly represents." Evelyn continued her work, unaware of their discussion. She didn't think about fame or discovery. She only cared about understanding. When she made a mistake, she didn't get angry. She smiled and said, "Thank you for teaching me." To her, every error was a hint, every failure a step closer. This attitude shocked the observers. They had been trained to see mistakes as weakness. She saw them as partners. One evening, when the twin moons of the Council's world rose, Evelyn finally allowed herself to rest. She sat beside her floating notes, sipping tea she had made from earth plants. She spoke softly, not to anyone, but to the universe itself. "You know," she said, "you remind me of music. You have harmony and dissonance. Maybe that's why no one could solve you." They were trying to silence the noise when they should have been listening to it. Her words were recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. Philosophers debated them. Musicians turned them into songs. For the first time in ages, science and art were being spoken of in the same breath again. The galaxy began to remember something it had forgotten, that wonder and logic were not enemies. They were siblings. Days passed. The Council sent a message to check her progress. "Have you found the solution?" they asked. Evelyn smiled tiredly. "Not yet," she said. "But I found the right question." That simple answer stunned them. For so long, they had focused only on answers. None of them had thought about asking if they were even solving the right problem. Her words spread through the Council like a wave of light. Even the most rigid thinkers began to pause and reflect. Could it be that all their perfect logic had blinded them to the simple truth? Back in her chamber, Evelyn continued to build patterns. She combined ancient alien theories with human geometry, merging what others thought incompatible. She called it symmetrical chaos. It was beautiful, swirling lines that folded into themselves infinitely. The machines couldn't explain it, but it worked. The numbers that had once resisted every attempt now began to align, softly, like they were singing in harmony with her thoughts. The Council started sending scientists to observe her in person. One of them, a being of light named Thalen, approached her after many days. "Human," he said, his voice a gentle vibration. "We do not understand how you think." Evelyn smiled. "Neither do I," she replied. "That's what makes it fun." Thalen paused, glowing brighter. "You make it sound like a game." "It is," she said simply. "Play and curiosity that's how children learn. Maybe the universe is just a child too, waiting for someone to play with it." Those words stayed with Thalen. Later he would repeat them in the council hall, and they would become a new philosophy. The universe as a playground of thought. By the end of the 6th week, Evelyn had filled the entire chamber with equations. The lights shimmered like constellations. The observers noticed something extraordinary. Every pattern she created, no matter how different, began to align perfectly with the prime continuum's core rhythm. She was not solving it piece by piece. She was understanding its essence. In her final session of that phase, she stood before the glowing patterns, breathing slowly. "It's not about numbers," she whispered. "It's about balance, and between chaos and order, between reason and feeling." That's what everyone missed. The air around her vibrated softly, like the chamber itself was listening. Then for a brief moment, the entire room glowed brighter than ever before. The observers' sensors went wild. For the first time in galactic history, the prime continuum responded. The impossible equation had recognized her. The council erupted in disbelief. What did she do? "She didn't solve it," said Thalen quietly. "She understood it." And as Evelyn looked up at the floating web of light that surrounded her, she felt tears in her eyes. For the first time, the universe had smiled back. Evelyn stood in the silent chamber, surrounded by her glowing equations. The air shimmered faintly, alive with energy that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. For weeks she had worked without rest, chasing patterns through the darkness of logic and light. Every number, every curve, every strange flicker of possibility had brought her closer to something she could not yet name. And now at last she felt it, that quiet, electric stillness before discovery, the breath the universe takes just before it reveals its secrets. She took a deep breath and stared at the final sequence floating in front of her. The prime continuum glowed like a living thing, lines of silver and gold spinning around one another, creating shapes that changed faster than thought. It was beautiful and terrifying at once, a maze of infinite possibility. She could almost hear it whispering to her. Not in words, but in rhythm, in a gentle hum that echoed inside her chest. "You're close," it seemed to say. "You've almost seen me." In the grand council chamber high above the planet, thousands of beings watched the projection of her progress. They filled the air with flickering light and color, each species expressing emotion in its own way. Some were curious, some skeptical, and others simply silent. The prime continuum had never responded to anyone before. It had accepted calculations, consumed logic, and rejected every answer ever given. But with the human, something different was happening. The equation was moving. It was changing shape as she worked, as if reacting to her thoughts. "She's not solving it," one alien said. "She's speaking to it." "Impossible," replied another. "Equations do not respond. They are not alive." "Then explain this," said Thalen, the being of light who had been observing her closely. "The prime continuum adapts. When she stops, it stops. When she hesitates, it waits. It's as if it's listening." Inside the chamber, Evelyn closed her eyes. Her mind raced, but her hands were steady. She began to write again, tracing invisible lines through the air. She whispered as she worked, her voice soft but sure. "You're not a puzzle," she murmured. "You're a pattern of balance. Chaos and order, holding hands." The glowing lines responded instantly, folding into new shapes that none of the galactic minds had ever seen before. The council watched as the impossible happened. The equations began to collapse, not in destruction but in simplification. Layers of complexity fell away like peeling bark, revealing something pure beneath. What had been infinite began to look simple, almost childlike. A crystalline delegate gasped, its surface flashing blue. "It cannot be!" "The continuum has never reduced itself." Thalen's light dimmed in awe. "She's showing it how to be simple." Evelyn didn't hear their words. She was deep inside her thoughts, lost in the music of logic and imagination. For her, this was not about fame or history. It was about understanding the quiet truth hidden beneath all things, that simplicity and beauty are the same. Her hand moved faster, drawing glowing curves that flowed like rivers. Every movement felt natural, like she had known the answer all her life but had forgotten until this moment. Hours passed, though to Evelyn, they felt like minutes. The chamber grew warmer. The floor beneath her vibrated gently. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of something immense, a door that had waited for eons to be opened. The final line appeared before her, incomplete. She looked at it, smiling faintly. "It's not an answer," she whispered. "It's a relationship." Then she drew one last curve, a simple loop that connected the beginning and end of the equation into a perfect circle. At that moment, the room exploded with light. The prime continuum pulsed once, then again, and then the entire chamber filled with a brilliant glow so intense that even the observers outside had to shield their senses. The energy rippled outward through the council's world, through its atmosphere, through space itself. Across hundreds of systems, sensors recorded a sudden wave of harmonic resonance, a vibration that hummed through the void like a note struck on a cosmic instrument. In the council hall, chaos erupted. Beings shouted in 1,000 voices, in light, in thought, in sound. "What is happening?" one cried. "The equation, it's stabilizing," another answered. "It was never meant to be solved," shouted a third. But Thalen, watching with quiet awe, whispered, "It was never meant to be solved by perfection. It was meant to be understood by imperfection." Inside the chamber, Evelyn stood at the center of the storm of light. She wasn't afraid. She felt calm, peaceful even. The glow around her flickered gently, wrapping her in waves of warmth. The prime continuum had become something entirely new. The endless streams of numbers had vanished. What remained was a single elegant pattern, a circle surrounded by smaller circles, all moving in rhythm. It was simple enough to draw by hand, yet deep enough to contain the structure of the universe itself. Evelyn smiled. "There you are," she said softly. "You were never hiding. You were waiting for someone to stop looking and start listening." As she spoke, the light dimmed to a soft golden glow. The storm faded. Silence filled the chamber once again, but it was not the cold silence of before. It was warm, alive, full of meaning. The prime continuum was solved, not by power, not by logic, but by understanding. The council summoned her immediately. She was led into the vast hall where the delegates floated above their luminous thrones. The room was filled with murmurs of disbelief and wonder. She walked calmly to the center, still holding her piece of chalk. The glowing circle hovered above her head, spinning slowly like a halo of light. A voice deep and ancient filled the hall. "Human," it said, "the continuum has yielded. How did you do what none could?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment. Then she said, "I stopped trying to control it. I listened. Everyone treated it like a machine to be fixed, but it's not. It's alive in its own ways, like music. You can't force music, you have to feel it. The hall fell silent. The delegates looked at one another, unable to speak. For them, logic had always been the highest truth. Yet this small being from a young planet had found something beyond logic, something they had forgotten long ago. One crystalline delegate spoke bitterly. So emotion solved what intellect could not. Evelyn shook her head gently. Not emotion alone, balance, you need both, reason and feeling. One sees the structure, the other gives it life. Her words rippled through the chamber like a soft wind. Even the most rigid minds felt something stir within them, a faint, forgotten sense of wonder. Thalen stepped forward, his body glowing brighter than ever. You've changed the way we see ourselves, he said. You've reminded us that thinking is not just calculation inquiring, it's connection. Evelyn smiled, though her eyes were tired. I didn't change anything, she said. I just reminded the universe of what it already knew. Outside, the effects of her discovery began to spread. The new formula, her simplified circle of balance, became the key to controlling space-time itself. Ships across the galaxy used it to travel safely through wormholes that had once torn them apart. Planets on the edge of collapse were stabilized. Energy flowed more efficiently, cleanly, and safely. Entire civilizations flourished because of what one human had discovered in a moment of quiet understanding. But even as celebrations began, not everyone was at peace. Some of the older races felt a strange discomfort. They had spent thousands of years chasing perfection, only to be outdone by imperfection, by a being who made mistakes, who doubted herself, who laughed at her failures. For some it was humiliating. For others it was liberating. Perhaps, one ancient philosopher said, perfection was our cage. The human showed us how to be free. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat alone in her chamber, now silent and empty. The glowing circle floated gently before her, still spinning. She traced it with her finger, thinking about everything that had happened. She wasn't proud or boastful. She felt a strange kind of sadness, the kind that comes when something beautiful ends. She whispered softly, "You were never just numbers. You were a mirror." The prime continuum pulsed once, as if answering her, then faded into a soft shimmer of light. It had fulfilled its purpose. It didn't need to exist as a mystery anymore. When she left the chamber, the delegates bowed, something that had never been done before for any living being. They offered her a place among them, a title, even immortality. She thanked them but refused. "I'm not a god," she said. "I'm just a person who loves patterns." Her ship waited outside, ready to take her back to Earth. Before stepping aboard, she looked back at the shining world of the Council. It glowed with new energy, alive in ways it had never been before. Somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning, not just for her, but for all of them. As her ship disappeared into the dark sea of stars, the council members stood in silence, watching the fading trail of light. One of them finally spoke, voice soft with awe. "All our logic, all our power, and yet it took a fragile creature from a small blue world to teach us what it means to understand." And in that moment, even the stars seemed to burn a little brighter, as if the universe itself was smiling, not because a problem had been solved, but because at last someone had truly listened. When Evelyn returned to Earth, the world had already heard whispers of what she had done. The story had traveled faster than light. A human had solved the prime continuum, the impossible equation that had defeated the galaxy's oldest and wisest beings for millions of years. Every news channel, every university, every child who looked up at the night sky was talking about her. But Evelyn didn't feel like a hero. She didn't even feel different. As her small spacecraft landed in a quiet field near her university, she only felt a strange calm, like someone waking up from a dream that was both beautiful and sad. The door opened, and the cool evening air touched her face. The sky was orange with sunset, and for the first time in months she saw the Earth's simple beauty: clouds, trees, the smell of rain. After all the bright worlds and alien lights, her home looked small, soft, and wonderfully imperfect. She stepped out, her feet sinking into the wet grass. A group of students and scientists stood waiting for her, unsure what to say. When she smiled, they ran toward her, cheering. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Everyone wanted to know what it felt like to be the person who changed the galaxy. But Evelyn didn't answer right away. She just said softly, "It feels quiet." Her words confused them, but she didn't explain. How could she tell them that the universe, in all its vastness, had felt less alive than this moment, standing under a sky filled with stars, hearing the wind rustle through the trees? In the following days, her life became a storm of attention. The Galactic Council sent envoys to Earth, offering her honors beyond imagination. They wanted to build monuments, name galaxies after her, even make her a permanent member of the Council. Nations across Earth celebrated her as humanity's greatest mind. But Evelyn didn't want monuments or medals. She asked only for one thing: to go back to her classroom. Her colleagues didn't understand. "You solved the greatest problem in the universe," one of them said. "Why would you go back to teaching basic math?" She smiled gently. "Because that's where it all starts. Every idea, every discovery, it begins with someone trying to understand something small. I want to remind people of that." And so she returned to her university, to her small office filled with chalkboards and books. Students who came to her class expected to see a legend, someone serious and distant. Instead, they found a woman who laughed easily, who drew doodles on the board, who asked strange questions like, "What does a number feel like?" Or, "If 0 had a sound, what would it be?" Her lessons were not just about math. They were about wonder, about seeing the world differently. Sometimes she would pause during a lecture and stare out the window, her eyes distant. The students would wait silently, knowing she was thinking of the stars. Then she would turn back and say, "You know, the universe isn't as complicated as we think. It's just shy. It hides its secrets behind simplicity." The news networks never stopped trying to interview her again, but she refused most of them. When she did agree, she always said the same thing: "I didn't solve the prime continuum. I just stopped trying to control it. The universe doesn't like being told what to do. It likes being listened to." Her words confused scientists who believed only in logic and data, but poets, dreamers, and artists understood her perfectly. While Evelyn lived quietly on Earth, the rest of the galaxy changed faster than anyone could have imagined. Her discovery, the circle equation, became the foundation of new science. Starships that once took centuries to reach another system now arrived in days. Energy sources once thought unstable became safe. Planets once isolated by distance were suddenly connected. Trade, communication, and understanding spread like light across the dark. And more importantly, something changed in the minds of those who used her discovery. The beings of the galaxy began to think differently. For ages, they had believed that perfection was the highest goal, that mistakes were weaknesses, that emotions were distractions. But now, they began to see the value of imperfection. They started to laugh more, to question more, to wonder again. Some even began to study human art, music, and dreams. They realized that creativity was not chaos. It was the language of the universe itself. On the Council's homeworld, Thalen, the being of light who had witnessed her discovery, created a school called the Institute of Balance. Its motto came from Evelyn's words: "Reason gives structure, emotion gives meaning." For the first time, mathematics was taught alongside philosophy and music. Students were encouraged to make mistakes, to explore illogical ideas, to fail and learn again. It was a revolution unlike any before. Back on Earth, Evelyn's life moved slowly. She grew older, her hair turning silver, her hands trembling slightly when she wrote on the board. But her mind remained bright, curious, and full of humor. Sometimes she would sit in her office late at night, surrounded by papers and chalk dust, staring at the glowing projection of her circle, the same pattern that had once saved civilizations. It floated gently in the air, rotating slowly. One evening, a young student entered her office, shy and nervous. "Professor," he said, "I don't understand how you knew the answer to the prime continuum. Everyone says it was luck." Evelyn smiled. "Maybe it was," she said softly. "But maybe luck is just what happens when you stop forcing the world to fit your way and start seeing it for what it is." The student looked confused, but he nodded politely and left. After he was gone, Evelyn whispered to the empty room, "It was never about answers. It was about understanding." Years passed. Her name became legend, not just on Earth but across thousands of worlds. Statues were built, books were written, and songs were composed in her honor. Yet Evelyn never saw herself as extraordinary. She often said to her students, "I wasn't special, I was curious. Curiosity is the only real magic in the universe." When she finally grew too old to teach, she spent her days walking through the university gardens. She liked to sit under the same old oak tree near the math building, a notebook in her lap watching the sunset. Visitors from other worlds would sometimes come to see her, bringing gifts, messages, and even questions about new problems they couldn't solve. She listened kindly but always answered the same way. Don't look for the solution. Look for the balance. One night, as the stars began to appear above her, Evelyn looked up at them with a tired but peaceful smile. She thought of all the beings she had met, the glowing minds, the crystalline philosophers, the mechanical thinkers, and she realized something beautiful. Despite their differences, they all looked at the same stars, asked the same questions, and sought the same truth. The universe wasn't divided by species or intelligence. It was connected by curiosity. That night, she wrote her final words in her notebook before falling asleep beneath the tree. Sometimes understanding doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from seeing what others overlook. When the university staff found her the next morning, she was sitting quietly with a faint smile, her notebook still open. The page glowed softly where her last words were written, as if the universe itself had blessed them. Her passing was mourned across galaxies. From distant planets to floating cities made of light, millions of beings paused to honor the woman from Earth who had taught them to think differently. Every ship that traveled through space used her circle, the symbol of balance, simplicity, and connection. They called it the human equation. But perhaps the most beautiful tribute was silent. On the Council's homeworld, in the great hall where Evelyn had once stood, a new light appeared in the sky, a small, steady star that hadn't been there before. It shone softly, brighter than the rest, and the beings who saw it named it Evelyn's star. They said it was the universe's way of remembering her, the human who had listened, not demanded, who had understood, not conquered. And so her legacy lived on, not in monuments or machines, but in the quiet hearts of those who dared to wonder. Across the galaxy, whenever a young mathematician looked at a difficult problem and felt lost, they would think of the woman from Earth and whisper her favorite saying, "Maybe it's not about finding the right answer. Maybe it's about asking the right question." And somewhere, far beyond the reach of any telescope, perhaps Evelyn was still listening, smiling gently as the universe continued to sing its endless, perfect song of balance and light.